Alright, this review is actually going to be brought to you at 3:20 in the morning because I actually just got back from Valerian and the Nut Job too, because I happened to figure out that there is a drive-in about an hour from here, and it just happened to be playing those two, and I haven't been to a drive-in in almost a decade, so this is when I decided to do that. It could have been Spider-Man and Baby Driver a couple of weeks ago, and even though I'd already seen them, I would have done that for sure if I had known enough ahead of time, but alas, I was stuck with Valerian and the Nut Job 2, which, to be fair, number one, the Nut Job 2, I believe this is its day of release, and secondly, neither one I had seen yet, so I figure why not just go for it. So that's also why this video might be significantly darker, possibly, than the others, because I typically have the sunlight coming in, not so much at 3:20 in the morning. So let's get started, because we have 4 to go through. Even though they played the Nut Job first, we'll start with Valerian. The new gigantic sci-fi epic Luc Besson movie, which I of course have talked about in the past that I'm really not much of a Luc Besson fan. I only recently started kinda liking The Fifth Element after my brother insisted I watch it again. And of course, you know, stuff like Leon has always been good, but for the most part, even if he's just like a producer or just a writer, even if he's not just the director, still, typically when I see his name, I'm not very excited. So I had heard that this was basically like some gigantic passion project that was very long in the making, and it does have source material that, once again, as I just talked about with the Dark Tower last week, I am not familiar with, like, at all, so I have nothing in regards to that to base my opinion of this movie on, so just know that going in. So to start off with, and apparently this was like the most expensive movie to ever come out of France or something. So there's that. There's a lot going behind it. It was one of those movies that sadly was kind of like, and you almost kind of get a vibe of this visually in some cases, mostly in the creatures, not so much the setting, but kind of a John Carter vibe, and obviously not just in the aspects of the movie itself, but the whole, you know, you see a movie this big and you think about its, you know, success prospects, and you think, this movie's probably gonna be one of those movies that goes down as a giant loss for a studio or any other thing. And that kind of carried with, especially since it was opening against Dunkirk. So, all of that, I wasn't really quite sure. I had heard the ambition intrigued me. So I wasn't necessarily going into it hating it. And I think Dane DeHaan's a very strong actor, so him being in the lead was interesting. Not so much his co-star, who I have bashed plenty of times in the past, but we'll get to her in a second. But to start off, we talk about how expensive this movie was. Like, it's now notoriously expensive. So I wonder, is that gonna shine through immediately? Like, are we gonna see that this movie's budget was warranted? I don't know. This is one of those movies where it's kind of hard to tell what was done intentionally and what wasn't, because with his movies, you look at them and there almost has to be, like, some kind of intentional cheesiness, I guess, to where he kind of wants to go big and epic, but also kind of stay in, like, a sort of a B-movie foundation. So sometimes it's really hard to tell if something is not up to par, if that's intentional or not. And here we start off on this other planet with this other alien species or whatever, and you kind of immediately get a bit of an Avatar feel. This is going to be a recurring theme about, this is yet another one of those movies that strives to be so ambitious and so original, but you can see a lot of other movies in it. And when I saw this, my first thought was, well, it doesn't look real. So if we're supposed to be pulled in immediately by this particular world that we're looking at right now, it's not off to a positive start. And it actually got to the point to where the background of it looked so fake. I was like, this looks like somebody in a simulation. Is this what this is going to be? Like, it's going to do this whole thing, and then we realized somebody was in a simulation, that old thing. Well, no, but in we transition from this to somebody in a simulation. So that was a bit mind-boggling, but and then going into that simulation, we meet Dane DeHaan and Cara Delevingne's characters, who are our heroes here, and they are a couple, I think. It seems more like they are kind of a couple, but Dane DeHaan thinks they're much more of a serious couple than she does, despite the fact that one of the running jokes is his lack of commitment. It's all very confusing, this relationship, but and when you see these characters interact, you kind of get a vibe immediately that they're going for that old cliche, the guy doesn't want to be committed, but he's really, really going after the girl, even though he's got a sketchy past in regards to women and all that. And then there's the whole, she gets mad at him for backseat driving when she's, got control of the ship or whatever. And it's like, okay, I think I see what you're doing here, because we learn in the opening that we're in the very, 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 very extremely far future. And at that point in time, we're still going to have couples arguing the way they do today. They're supposed to have this very modern feel, especially when they get off the ship and they keep talking about wanting to go to the beach, and DeHaan says something like, "Are you guys the band?" or something, and it's like, I get what you're doing, but here's the thing: is number one, making them an extremely cliche couple, just putting them in the distant future, it still makes them a cliche couple. But I do understand the idea of how that could work. The whole idea of taking something modern and putting it in this extremely vast future. I understand where the idea comes from, but I don't think it really works here. I think it doesn't rise above this is just the cliche couple shit we've seen before. And I also think something that would maybe help is, I guess, I would say the problem with DeHaan here is that he didn't seem to have a lot of direction for a lot of the movie. Specifically these scenes when they're supposed to be doing couple banter. And of course we know Dane DeHaan is an awesome actor. I just recently saw Life, the movie where he played James Dean, among many other things, obviously, like Chronicle, The Place Beyond the Pines, Kill Your Darlings, just everywhere. This guy is great. And here it's like when he's supposed to be doing this loving banter with her, and when he's supposed to be like, showing that she's absolutely the girl for him, it's just like the whole movie he has the same expression. Like, he never really, he does like have a couple of funny lines here and there, and he does kind of, emote in one scene or another, but for the most part it's just like, it's just kind of all the same in his eyes. Like, he just has that same look in his eye no matter what he's feeling, especially when it's towards her. As I dismiss the easy joke it would take to say, well, look who his co-star is, would you? But but here's the thing, though, is the weird thing is that even though I have bashed her a lot, like, I think she completely ruins, I think, we all know Suicide Squad has a lot of problems. I'd go as far as to say she's at least 85% of it. She is 85% of the problems Suicide Squad has. And obviously Paper Towns. We really have to go into that again. But the thing here is that I actually think she comes out of this better than DeHaan does, because while DeHaan is like stranded without a director throughout this movie, this is like the first time I feel she's really shown like real personality in movies anyway. Because, I mean, you could say she had a personality in Paper Towns, but it was one that you were sick of 30 seconds in. And then once again, Suicide Squad was just a total disaster on her part. But here it actually kind of felt like she was actually into her role. It wasn't more like a casting director just thought, hey, this movie can make a lot of money if we just put this person in it because the young people like her. It actually felt like she kind of was into actually being in this, which is a vibe I don't get from her in her other movies, at least from what I've seen. And she's fun. She's still not great, but she is a major step above what I've seen from her so far. And given what's around her in this movie, it makes her look pretty decent. So there is that. So the fact that she was able to look better than an actor like Dane DeHaan says something. Not just the fact of it's like he was left out to dry, but the fact that she did bring something to the table, which I was not expecting to say or witness or anything like that. So you go in, and I was talking earlier about, I had an Avatar vibe from that first planet we see, but as I talked about, you will see a lot of other movies in this. Obviously, there is some Blade Runner in there, complete with Rutger Hauer's in this for like 30 seconds. And then there's a little bit of Total Recall here and there. That, like, the scenes that lead into the Ethan Hawke scenes felt very Total Recall. And then we get to the fact that this is Luc Besson. And probably Luc Besson's most famous movie, actually, yeah, probably by far, is, of course, The Fifth Element. And you will see a lot of that in this, to the point to where it's almost like he didn't want to leave that Fifth Element world. Like, I use the term world lightly, considering, the concept of this movie, but in the sense that you know what I mean. This movie could very well be in the same universe as The Fifth Element. And it's especially in the first half. Maybe not so much the second half, but definitely the first half, especially when we get to stuff like the scenes with the tourists feels like a deleted scene from The Fifth Element. Just the appearance, the characters, all that stuff, the tour guide, all of this stuff just feels like it was scrapped from The Fifth Element and put into this movie. Despite the fact that this was supposed to be the big, kind of an original thing in regards to what we've seen before, but really it really just isn't that at all. That's where really a lot of the movie's problems lie, which aren't, this movie doesn't really have any condemning problems. Like, nothing that makes it go below, enjoyable and stuff like that. It doesn't, there's nothing that makes it totally crash and burn, but there are moments where it hurts to see that there was ambition in here for sure, and it feels like a massive movie. It really does. But it just, once again, like a lot of these big sci-fi movies, just feels like a lot of reused parts put together in different places. And I think that's something that brings the movie down a lot, much more than what it could have been, and there are hints that it could have been throughout the movie. And then there's stuff like, there's the Rihanna scenes, where it was, for starters, I will say, now, mind you, once again, this was at a drive-in, and Valerian was the second movie, and it's a pretty long movie. But I must say that I couldn't help but notice that when we got to the scene where Rihanna is on the stripper pole, 3 people started their cars and left. So, they could have been tired, they could have had stuff to do in the morning. I just thought it was a little funny that it just happened to be this first Rihanna scene that 3 people at once took off. But, and there's a moment when she's talking about how, obviously, she can do the whole shape-shifting thing, and that's her whole gimmick. But there's actually a moment where she says to Dane DeHaan, it's like, I can be anything. There's, like, nothing I can't do or I can't become. And it's like, Rihanna, as an actress in this movie, as an actress period, because we also saw Battleship as well, that's a pretty risky thing to say there. You're really risking the bad laugh by saying, I can be anything. That's, yeah. But the Rihanna scenes do bring us something. I did not know, much as I love the dude, I did not even know that Ethan Hawke was in this till I saw his name in the opening credits. And I was like, well, that's what's gonna suck here is he's probably gonna be hidden. Like, you probably won't even tell it's him. It'll probably be like him doing motion capture or something. And then sure enough, DeHaan's walking through the streets, and here comes Ethan Hawke. And you can tell immediately, because he's right there. And he is this flamboyant, cowboy, keyboard playing, futuristic pimp. And I was watching him play this part, and it was like, this is the test. Because I've been saying for a long time, I think there is nothing that Ethan Hawke will be able to do to make me stop loving him as an actor. So it's like Luc Besson heard me say that, and he was like, let's put this to the test. Let's see this. And so I watched this performance play out. He's only in it for like 2 minutes. But my God, is he there for that 2 minutes? And yeah, I still love the dude. This is the ultimate proven part. From here on out, I can say without a doubt, there is nothing Ethan Hawke can do to make me stop loving him as an actor. Because I really loved that 2 minutes. Despite what it was. So, that made me happy. And then the movie goes on, and we're introduced to a lot of different, alien types, obviously, and different designs and all that. And this should be where the movie's creativity is really bursting. This is its time to shine outside of recognizable aspects of other movies. So we do see some stuff. There are some people that look like they're leftovers from Jabba's palace in Return of the Jedi. And then there are sometimes where it feels like they're going in the right direction, but they still kind of miss the mark. Like the duck guys. The duck guys who are basically the worms from Men in Black. And they come walking in, and they're ugly, and they're gray, and their personality, all three of them pretty much have like the same connecting conscience, the same personality or whatever, and it's like, you see these ugly gray characters that don't really bring a whole lot to their surroundings amidst this really vibrant, for the most part, looking movie. And it's like, once again, you can just see where it's like, I felt like this was going in a direction, but it didn't quite reach it. And it's like, this movie is always almost there. But it never quite crosses that finish line. That's not to say that there isn't some cool shit in this movie, of course. Some of the action scenes, while a bit redundant, and once again not adding a whole lot to the sci-fi stuff we haven't seen before. There's stuff like when Dahan has to go through the thing, and these action scenes are all very vague, so my descriptions won't be very specific. But he's going through, and then he he makes the stepping stones as he goes, and then he goes into another thing, and it's like a tunnel, and then he goes into another thing, and he's underwater, and it's like just all one shot from behind him, just all the way through. That's some really cool shit. The underwater stuff is really good. There are like those big giant underwater monsters. That's a really cool thing. So the stuff is definitely here, but the problem is that the movie's just really just too much of a mess, story-wise, and and like I said, after a while the action can seem a bit redundant, especially in the middle, but it's not to say it certainly doesn't have its moments within there. But it just, once again, it just always feels like a movie that's on the cusp, that never really wants to go out of its safety zone of, well, here's the recognizable stuff from other movies of this type. So that's a bummer, but it does, like I said, it does have those moments, though. I really love the opening, the Space Oddity opening, that shows us the kind of advancement as we're going forward, as the years are going by, the centuries are going by. And there is always kind of this sense of it's engaging enough and entertaining enough to where you're always wondering where the main characters are going to be in the next scene and what they're going to be involved in and with what kind of creatures. So, yeah, there's definitely something entertaining here, but as the big, epic, game-changing thing it kind of promised to be, we're not quite there. We aren't really in the kind of area, say, a Cameron could have been in, so that's it. But it's a lot more entertaining than I thought it'd be, given my previous thoughts on Luc Besson and his choice of leading lady. So, so it's certainly not bad. So, that's what we have. Our second movie, which once again was my first movie tonight, is The Nut Job 2, Nutty by Nature, is its full title. And if you watched a few years ago, you'll know that my scathing review of The Nut Job made it one of the worst movies of that year. Pretty easily. And it was just this absolute complete disaster. It was like trying desperately to catch up to trends that were long since gone. And it was basically a movie that was made for 3-year-olds and under. So I wasn't sure, number one, how this got a sequel, and secondly, what they were going to do with it. And I was also confused because I was like, this feels like such a straight-to-video thing. I guarantee they didn't even get the same voice cast. Because there was Will Arnett as Surly, our hero. There was Katherine Heigl as his girlfriend. And there was Maya Rudolph as the dog. And there was like Jeff Dunham's the mole, I think. All these people, and I'm watching it, and the voices don't sound familiar. The guy doing Surly doesn't sound like Will Arnett. He sounds like a guy that has only just started his impression of Larry David. And the dog didn't sound like Maya Rudolph. Katherine Heigl didn't really sound like her, but then halfway through the movie, they kind of started to. And then when the credits came up, I thought I'd double check, and yeah, they came back. Will Arnett was in fact Surly, Katherine Heigl was his girlfriend, Maya Rudolph was the dog. But they really didn't sound like themselves at the beginning. Now I wonder if maybe that was just me, or if it was like, kind of like when I suggested that sometimes the cat doesn't talk in 9 Lives because Spacey only wanted to do so much work for such a shitty movie. Maybe Will Arnett, Maya Rudolph, and Heigl did the same thing. Heigl's kind of desperate. Maybe she was there the whole time, but but the other two, surely they have work to do to not be involved with The Nut Job 2 after seeing the product that was The Nut Job. But according to the credits, they were here the whole time, so I must say that threw me off. But I guess it gives us a little bit of hope. It's like, well, maybe there's something a little better, and yeah, pretty easily, this is infinitely better than the first movie. To where, I mean, we're still doing the same old shitty plots. Like, there's still, now there's always the evil conglomerate guy. Like, there was Ken Jeong in Norm of the North, there was Rob Riggle in the Lorax, that guy. Well, now it's the mayor, and he's Bobby Moynihan. And he's just doing that old thing where it's like, I'm gonna, tear down the park, I'm gonna put this corporate stuff here, and then they have to save the day after they accidentally blow up the nut shop because somebody leaves the boiler on. And that's because that's where they are for a while. They're just at the nut shop and all that stuff's been left behind, so they're just eating recklessly. They don't want to go back to the park. We never hear from Liam Neeson Raccoon again, but there was... Yeah, you think he died in the first movie? No. After the credits, he's just hanging out on a buoy. Don't ask me why I know that. So, we go forward, and it actually feels kind of like a real adventure movie. Not like a really great adventure movie, but kind of in the way The Secret Life of Pets was. It was a modest adventure movie, but at least it was entertaining enough to go all the way through to the end without completely pissing you off. And it keeps that up through the whole movie. It actually has focus on its characters. The whole the situation between Surly and Buddy, that mouse that never talks, and like in the first movie they're supposedly best friends, even though all Surly does is like verbally abuse him, and you wonder why. Well, this movie explains to you how they're best friends in a flashback that's kind of touching. It's a little too late in the movie for my taste. Like, I think this is something they probably should have introduced a lot earlier than they do, but still, it's in there. And for a nut job movie, that's a huge accomplishment. So, it goes on, and we're introduced to new characters. There is Frankie the dog, who is Bobby Cannavale. I like his introduction, where he says, I'm Frankie. That's long for Frank. So, and then there is a mouse whose voice I did not recognize right away, but when I saw who it was in the end credits, it suddenly all made sense. This mouse, to bring this movie back, is basically a ripoff of Kevin Hart's Bunny and The Secret Life of Pets. But it still brings on some funny scenes, which once again, this movie has at least one funny scene in it. That's already an accomplishment over the first movie. But this movie has many laughs in it. There are the groundhog characters. The groundhog characters are hit and miss, but still, they get hits occasionally. This is one of those movies where the funniest things are usually the stuff in passing. They're like just things kind of quickly said and then they're gone. They don't dwell on them. I like the clock joke towards the end. There's a running joke where Katherine Heigl keeps wanting to break out into song and then she keeps getting interrupted. I think that's a joke lifted from the Farrelly Brothers' Three Stooges movie, but it's still funny because of that cliche is so tired. It's always fun to see it toyed with. And then there's a moment that I really liked because it wasn't a hilarious moment, but it was funny enough, but also highlighted something that was so wrong about the first movie, and that was this moment when the mayor is getting ready to start building the theme park over the park. And so he takes the small shovel and he sticks it in the ground, and they're going to break the ground, and that's the whole thing. And Surly's under the impression that, how is he going to build a park with that thing? And then a giant bulldozer and a giant, thing just come in and just start ripping the ground apart. And it occurs to Surly out loud, oh, the small shovel was a symbolic thing. And the reason that's funny is because he, legitimately comes to that conclusion. He's like, oh, I get it now. Okay, got it. And in the first movie, that would have probably been really drawn out and really embarrassing and probably delivered by that Brendan Fraser squirrel. And it would have done it in a way to where they would have just blatantly said it. It's weirdly specific what I'm trying to describe here, but it's like, in the first movie, they would have just said it. And it wouldn't have been in any kind of joking manner. It just would have been a line that they threw in that they hoped was funny. But the way it's delivered in this movie, the way it's like you actually see him gradually figuring out that the small shovel was just symbolic and they're actually already tearing the fucking ground up. It's just such a step up from the first movie. Just in this one tiny detail among all the other things around it. And there is also, there's also quite a clever visual thing as well. I wouldn't call it a joke, but it's this moment when he's kind of having a dialogue with himself, and he's trying to figure out if he were to say something, what Katherine Heigl would say to him in return. And he's him, and then he goes behind a bottle, and he takes the shape of her, and the bottle has a brown tint to it, because obviously he's purple and she's brown. And it makes him look exactly like her when he's behind this bottle, and that's how he does the dual talking to himself and wondering how she would respond to his plans. And I thought that was just such a clever visual thing, to the point that it's just like, this movie is probably just okay. But for some reason, after you've seen the first movie, this movie looks brilliant in comparison. So it really makes you wonder, how much credit do you give a movie like this, where it's like, it's really hard to tell what's legitimately clever and what's just seems really clever when you look at what came before it. So it's really hard to say. So that 2.5-star rating you see at the bottom probably seems pretty generous. But I mean, really, if you can improve this much, you need to be given the credit for it. Even if it does seem like, you're giving a dog a treat for shitting on the floor, still, it's like you realized your mistakes, and there are a lot of them. one thing. There is one thing that I remember specifically about the first movie, and this is when you can really tell the first thing they did when they set out to make this movie was that they were going to improve upon the first one. That is, I know the internet has this massive, massive boner for Brendan Fraser right now. I don't know what it is, but that's the way it is. I get it if you're talking about like Gods and Monsters or School Ties, but apparently Brendan Fraser had this somewhat amazing career that we all missed, despite the fact that we grew up with his mostly shitty movies. And so I watched The Nut Job 3 years ago, and the thing that annoys me the most is the character voiced by Brendan Fraser. That's not to say at all that it's his fault. It was a terribly written character. He had terrible jokes to work with. It's a terrible, terrible character that made a terrible movie even worse. Every single thing he said was just try-hard nothingness, and none of it was funny, even though all of it was attempting to be. And what did they do in this movie? That Brendan Fraser squirrel is nowhere to be found. He's never mentioned. He has disappeared and vanished off the face of the earth. Completely and totally out of this movie, despite the fact that nothing in the first movie indicates that that would be the case. Because he was one of the major characters in the first movie, and he was one of the major reasons that movie failed, because every single time he was on screen, it was a fucking fail. And they just deleted him entirely before walking into this. And it's like, that alone tells me, when they went into this, they were like, well, we can't make a legitimately good nut job movie, but let's do the very best we can to right the wrongs from the first one and see what we end up with. And yeah, like I said, the characters are much more charming. This movie just in general has such a more likable quality to it in comparison to the first one. Because like the first one is just, there's just nothing to like about that movie. Nothing at all. And just this movie's vibe immediately feels different. It feels more, likable and approachable, and it draws you in much easier. Because I don't know if the characters just feel much more likable now, because I guess you could say they've already gone through their changes for the first movie, if you have to give that movie credit for something. But yeah, it's fine. There's definitely, like I said, I don't remember laughing once at the first movie, so the fact that this movie has a fair amount of laughs in it is it just really kind of blew my mind. But it's still very much, a kid's movie. There's very childish humor in it, but as far as the humor goes, there are two things that the first one did terribly wrong. That is, number one, there was a lot of bodily humor, and secondly, there was the Psy, Gangnam Style bullshit. None of that, because that's the thing, is the nut job founded itself on a reference to a song and dance that was an already dated fad by the time the movie came out, and they fully committed to it. They looked like fucking idiots, and there is nothing like that in this one. There is no pandering to some fad. There is no completely bottom of the barrel humor. It's like I said, it's still very much a kid's movie, but it has brought itself up so many different levels, you have to commend it. You have no choice but to commend it for such a step up. So, that is what The Nut Job 2 is. It's really quite surprising. There is one more problem I have real quick, and that was the designs for the human characters are really damn boring. There was the Stephen Lang character in the first movie that was the mobster or whatever the fuck he was, and they just all looked like really boring humans, and it's you don't need these humans in here. You really, really don't. So it was kind of like how, how in The Great Mouse Detective, how it was all Basil lives inside Holmes' house, but we never see Holmes and Watson, we just see their shadows on the wall. Having those characters in that movie and in this movie is basically like if they had just flat out shown Holmes and Watson in The Great Mouse Detective, and it's fucking why? You really don't need to do that. And we have human characters in this too. Like I said, the mayor is the villain. And the mayor has this little sidekick, his little buddy, that's basically just his yes man. And it's like, I feel like they could have at least expressed something more with these characters. Like, even though this little yes man doesn't really do anything except that, and we only probably see his face like 3 times, still, I feel like the animators could have had a little fun in giving him the appearance of, like, some sleazy suit or something. But no, it is literally just a dude with glasses and a mustache. And that's it. And it's like, you really sense kind of the lack of creativity there when they go outside the animal characters, when they should be just going, feeling that creative energy as much as they can, and that's just kind of where it stops. So, but once again, infinitely more creative and fun than that bullshit a few years ago. So, there you go, shock surprise. Our third movie is going to be going in style. We're going into a DVD territory now. Because I missed this back when it came out, around the time Fate of the Furious was out, I think. And it seemed like your average run-of-the-mill comedy. It's the whole people desperate, so they're robbing big thing. It's the Fun with Dick and Jane scenario, only this time it's old guys. With probably the 3 most recognizable old guys in comedy movies, with Freeman, Michael Caine, and Alan Arkin. And Alan Arkin feels like he's done this before, because we basically already got this movie once, only it was hitmen instead of bank robbers, and that was stand-up guys, with Arkin and the other 2 being Pacino and Walken. Which is basically what this movie feels like, and obviously Morgan Freeman really likes his heist movies. You take out, like, the heist that was in The Dark Knight, obviously you've got the Now You See Me bullshit, there was the Maiden heist, there was The Code with Antonio Banderas, and now there's this. And yeah, when you look at this movie, you look at the poster, you know what it is. You know what it is from beginning to end. But the question is how they're going to execute this and how they're going to use 3 Oscar-winning actors who are amazing with comedy. And it does it quite well. Zach Braff is directing. Interesting choice. And the thing here is that it obviously has a very obvious beginning where we get all the different reasons of why they need to rob a bank. It's actually, I was assuming it was going to be multiple banks. It's just a bank. A bank and a trial run. And when it starts off, it basically starts to feel like an American version of I, Daniel Blake. if you can imagine that. And then obviously the desperation kicks in and we get all their different backstories. And that's really good. Like, where these movies would probably fail is showing the motivation, because you can go into a lot of cliches, or you can make it really uninteresting, thus making us not care about the characters. But no, all the backstory is nice and sweet. Freeman has this whole thing with his granddaughter, and Kane's got his whole backstory with Joey King being his granddaughter. And the whole what's going on with their jobs thing. There's definitely enough motivation to get you to care about these dudes for sure, and obviously their performances will bring it out naturally, as much as they could, even if their backstories couldn't. But their backstories are strong enough to be just as helpful as their performances themselves, which really helps for the rest of the movie. Really sets a nice background for what we're in for, and really is the foundation for what makes the movie work in the long run. And to start off, I guess this is really on Braff's credit too, as well as the writer. The writer was Theodore Melfi, who I believe was the dude that brought us Hidden Figures. It's like very interesting behind the scenes for this movie, given the type of movie it is. And the thing here is, you see this and you know immediately it's going to be a very kind of by-the-numbers comedy. Like, this is going to be something that was made for absolute mainstream appeal, so you imagine it's going to be very broad and very slapsticky and very big. But what I really liked here is the very first laughs in the movie are very downplayed, because it's this moment when Michael Caine walks into the bank. It's the very first scene of the movie. And he goes up and he's just told, he's given one of those things, and he's like, what's this do? And it's like, oh, when we're ready for you, it'll light up and it'll vibrate. And he's like, well, okay, so where am I waiting? And they're like, oh, just go to our guest lounge. And the guest lounge is 2 chairs and a coffee table. And then just as he sits down, the buzzer goes off. And it's like, it's so like, the fact that they started off the comedy in such kind of these very dry jokes, I thought was a really nice start and kind of really set the tone for the humor that's going to eventually build into big slapstick and not just start off with some, you know, stupid pratfall bullshit or whatever. How we gradually got there, and it kind of felt like humor that goes with, that really fits these characters. And I thought that's what they really pulled off well, also. And then there's stuff like some of the obvious jokes, like when they're watching The Bachelorette. And you immediately think it's like, well, yeah, three old guys watching current reality TV. Haha, the joke writes itself. Old guys. But the thing is you watch them watching The Bachelorette, and it's their commitment. Like, they're, like, watching Alan Arkin, Morgan Freeman, and Michael Caine watch The Bachelorette, you really feel their investment. It's when they're watching it. And that's what really sells the laugh. So I really like that they were even able to pull off a joke as obvious as that. Like a joke you could probably see coming from a mile away in a movie like this, and they still make it work in some way. Whether it be the writing, the setup, or the cast themselves, it all just kind of meshes together very nicely. And then once again, like I said, it does get very big and can get very silly. I was talking about before they decide they're going to rob a bank, they decide it'd be smart to have a trial run at a grocery store. And this eventually involves a very brief scene of Alan Arkin getting chased through a parking lot. That is just fucking hysterical. Just that whole sequence, once again, feels very big, feels very mainstream comedy, but when you can make it work, there's really nothing wrong with that. It's just such a rarity to see it work. You kind of convince yourself after a while that the comedy style in general is total bullshit, but this movie kind of brings you back down and realize, yeah, this used to work once, and it still can if you're talented enough, or if you have the right cast that can pull this off in a perfect way. And while we're talking about the cast, we do have a lot of side characters here. I did not know before going in Christopher Lloyd was in it. He's there very briefly, very funny. He's a very one-joke character, but the joke is funny. Especially because it's Christopher Lloyd, who I think hasn't had a non-cameo role since, Sin City 2? And even that was like for 30 seconds. I mentioned Joey King earlier, who's very good and very charming as Kane's granddaughter. That's kind of his motivation to get where he's going to go, which she sells very well. John Ortiz, a very welcome addition, is like the mastermind that kind of helps them playing out just how elaborate a bank robbery has to be. There's a bit of a waste in Matt Dillon, I think, as the cop that's kind of tracking them. He doesn't have a whole lot to do. They don't give him anything particularly funny to do, which we know he can be a genius with comedy. We saw in There's Something About Mary. So it's kind of a shame that he's just kind of here to kind of play it straight. And pretty much after the beginning of the movie, he just kind of disappears until we need him again, like towards the end. So that was a bit of a letdown, but and then there is Kenan Thompson, who's like the head of security at that grocery store. He gets a couple of funny lines as well. So you'd look at this concept and you see it as, okay, old guys rob a bank. So that, number one, how is this even going to happen? Because I get the concept. I've seen this concept a million times, but I mean, these guys are like 80. So how are they possibly going to do this whole Heat style bank robbery? But these John Ortiz scenes actually show you, and then eventually when we watch it all play out, how very elaborate and well thought out this whole heist actually is, and how it almost, I mean, we never go outside the thought of this is an over-the-top comedy that would never happen in real life, but it makes it believable enough while you're watching the movie that this could potentially play out this way with these three guys doing this. And they do it in a way as much as possible that doesn't make it to the point that it doesn't feel totally and completely ridiculous to the point that you can't stick with the movie. Like, you feel distant from the movie because you're like, it's getting a little too ridiculous. For me, that never came because of how well they thought out everything leading up to and after the fact. So I thought that was really well done. And there are moments where Braff seems to attempt a certain flair, like the whole split screen thing and the way scenes transition and all that. Even despite that, it still feels like a very generic comedy on a technical front. Um, but there's just that energy that he's able to keep up, and that's the important thing. There is one scene towards the end with Matt Dillon and a dog that's probably a bit over directed. It's like, well, that was a little. I mean, I know the stakes and everything, but I mean, that was a little too dramatic. But for the most part, he keeps up that comedic energy and just that constant moving very well. And the actors never kind of lose that juice when they're just bantering off of each other, and that's really what makes it shine. So, and on top of that, there are certainly some moments that are also, touching and all that, and just kind of, it all adds together into a nice little product. See, I'm really glad we didn't have a movie where those three talents went to waste. It was it made me very, very happy to see these three dudes in these roles in a movie that manages to pull off everything it's trying to do so well. So that was quite satisfying, much more than I thought it would be. That's for sure. Unlike our last movie. Our last movie is going to be The Dinner. The Dinner is the new movie by Owen Moverman, who is famous for bringing us The Messenger and Rampart. But he has since abandoned Woody Harrelson for Richard Gere, because The Dinner is him reuniting with Richard Gere after he made Time Out of Mind, the homeless movie, which was okay. And The Dinner is basically his Carnage. I know it has some kind of original source. I can't remember if it was another movie or what it was, but this movie comes from something that had to have been better executed than Moverman does it here. So what we have here is two married couples. Like, you'll see the Carnage resemblance quite a lot. We got Richard Gere and we've got Rebecca Hall, and Richard Gere is this congressman who is running for governor. So they're in the campaign bus, he can't stay off the phone, he can't stop doing business, and they're clearly distant. The first shot we see of them, they're sitting across from each other in the bus, just not saying a damn word to each other, not doing anything except staring into the abyss, not talking to each other. It seems almost intentional. And then we get a moment when they finally get to the restaurant, and he gets a call, a very important call, and he says, "Hold on 1 minute." And her response to this is this. And we realize what their relationship is and where it's at right now. But before that, we're introduced to the other married couple, who is Steve Coogan and Laura Linney. Laura Linney's basically there doing her Laura Linney thing. Just sitting back and letting her talent go right to waste while everybody else works around her. And we got Steve Coogan here, who seems to be the main focus of the movie. We're in his head more than anybody else's. In fact, he might be the only person in this movie that narrates, come to think of it. This movie is a fucking mess, I swear to God. And the problem with the fact that we're in Steve Coogan's head is because this guy is fucking unbearable. This guy walks around constantly having these hipstery thoughts and talking about how he's kind of this exercise in irony, I guess, because he's a guy that's always afraid that everybody he meets is one of those people that thinks they're above everybody, thus they're going to think less of him, think he's a lesser being, despite the fact that he goes around the entire movie, and we know this because we can hear his thoughts, saying basically he's above everybody else, and everybody else in the world is an ape. He just keeps saying this kind of stuff through the whole movie, and that's the way he sees the world. And they do that he and Gere both, they're brothers, and they both have that petty way of always, almost like they're trying to piss each other off, when really it's just basically their personalities at work beyond their control, because they just become such assholes by this point. And it gets to the point where it's like, they get to the restaurant, the whole point is they come to this very pretentious restaurant, and they're going to discuss the fact that their kids might have killed somebody. So, you see, it's very, very Carnage, it really is. Just much, much, much worse, and with none of the entertaining arguing. So, so they're brothers, and they have these contrasting personalities, and they're always basically trying to be petty to each other in one way or another, whether they realize it or not. Like, they get to the restaurant, and Gear doesn't like the table, but Steve Coogan's the guy saying, well, I'm not moving. Just because. Just to build a wall for Gear's path, and the other way around. And these are the characters that we're going to get to watch at this dinner table just fight and argue for 2 hours. Or so we think. Actually, a lot of this movie, much more of this movie than is said at the dinner table, is in flashbacks, where we learn that, like, for a couple of the kids, their mother is actually Chloe Sevigny, Rebecca Hall's the stepmom. And so they basically adopted this kid. And then we've got Steve Coogan and Laura Linney have another son. And these kids get together, they hang out, and they're complete and total delinquents. And they kind of try to play with this on a directorial standpoint with, like, increasing. We see it in the opening credits, and then it kind of happens throughout the movie, too, where you'll have, like, this elegance that comes with the restaurant aspect of it, and like the Gear character and the Coogan character, and then this will be interrupted by hip-hop music, which I guess is to show the kids' side of things. Now the kids are kind of constantly adding interruptions to this normal lifestyle these people are trying to keep up, this very high-end, high-class lifestyle these people are going, but it's all just... This movie is terribly, terribly handled. Talk about the fact that this movie, the big thing here is that it doesn't want to commit to its concept. The concept of the movie is that these 4 people are going to sit around and they're going to discuss what's going on. And I mean, look at these 4 people. Richard Gere, Rebecca Hall, yes. Laura Linney, yes. Steve Coogan, yes. Okay, if this is a movie about these 4 actors sitting at a dinner table and just fucking acting and acting, yes, make it 5 hours, make it 7 hours, yes. Only trouble is, number one, when I was feeling this way, when I knew the movie's concept, I was not aware that every single person in this movie is a total, complete piece of shit. Not just a piece of shit, kind of a fucking idiot, too. And they're fucking idiots while thinking they're above everybody else. These are the people we're hanging out with. But the thing here is that this is not even the movie. This is what the movie promises to be. This is the only concept in which this movie probably would have worked. But no, there is a lot. There's like, if the movie is 2 hours long, an hour and 35 minutes of it is probably flashbacks, if not more. And a lot of the flashbacks consist of what these fucking piece of shit kids did. There is a scene that's probably the worst scene of the year right now, where they just taunt this homeless woman who's in one of those ATMs that's like closed, like in like a booth, like a glassed off booth. And so they go in, and because they're spoiled rich kids, they say, hey, piece of shit, go get a job. You can't stay here because we say so. And they're like kicking her, and then they start throwing shit at her, and then they get heavier shit to throw at her, and then this motherfucker just starts lighting matches and throwing them at her until he accidentally sets her on fire and kills her. And they fucking record it with their phones because they think it's hilarious. So, what this whole movie is building to is, spoiler alert, I guess, they are under the impression that this was a total and complete accident. But we know this is not true because we saw it happen. Once she was on fire, they just watched, they laughed, they recorded it. And so, wasn't there a video that just went viral in real life recently where a guy was drowning and some kids were just recording him and making fun of him until he died? That's what this movie is about, only here's the conclusion. Once again, spoiler alert now. They come to the conclusion that, well, even though they've recorded it, there's still not enough evidence in that video. Because there are kids, we believe that they're innocent. We believe they did not really kill that woman on purpose. And then Richard Gere and Steve Coogan get into an unrelated physical fight. End movie. What are we supposed to do with this? What is this movie trying... Okay, I suppose it's trying to say something. Whether it be about modern society or whatever the fuck. It doesn't matter, because if you can't say something and make your... If your way of expressing your opinion is to make a movie like The Dinner, maybe you should back up and really, really think about how you want to express your opinions again before you open your mouth or put your pen to paper. Because you accomplish absolutely nothing with a piece of garbage movie like this. This movie has nothing to offer except to irritate an audience by throwing us 4 incredible actors and just making us hate every moment that they're on screen, because their only purpose in existence is to, when they're not fighting with each other, they're finding contrived reasons to get up from the table and walk away and go away by themselves, because this movie has no attention span. And when we finally get them together, what they want to do is come to the conclusion that we will not learn from anything. We are rich assholes, we're still going to be rich assholes, and our kids are going to be rich assholes who can get away with killing people because we just dismiss the fact that because they're our kids, they are innocent. That's the takeaway from this movie. That's the movie I saw. I know there are some critics that took to this. Whatever they saw, I don't know. I don't think that movie exists from my own eyes, from my own vantage point. But apparently it's out there for some people. But I just do not get... Do you know what this movie does? When I talk about having a horrible attention span and how it always wants to branch off and completely abandon its whole concept, there's like a moment where it gets just as pretentious as Steve Coogan's character himself. And I think we're kind of seeing this from his perspective. I'm not totally completely sure, but it goes all Godard on us. Yeah, there's a moment, like, right in the middle of the movie, for no fucking reason whatsoever, we get the history of Gettysburg, and, like, it looks like the film is all fucked up, and it's, like, changing color. It's, like, going from purple to, like, gold and shit. And throughout this, right in the middle of this movie about these kids killed this homeless woman, and the parents are fighting about whether they're innocent or not and what they can do about it, we get Stephen Lang narrating the history of Gettysburg to this fucked up footage, just right in the middle of the movie. And then it's gone. And then we go right back to Richard Gere and Steve Coogan having a flashback about a time they argued. What the fuck are you doing? What possible purpose do you serve by making this? You would do nothing but harm with this movie. You have now put a dent in all 4 of these amazing actresses' resumes because this movie's on it now. And we have seen them play these characters. And no, like I said, the message is off. If it was trying to say something, it's lost in the bullshit. It is lost in the fucking shitty, trashy product that we have received at the end of this. That means absolutely nothing. They do the thing, too, where they put fucking words on the screen, like chapters. Kind of like the chapters in Clerks. Where it's like, there's the start, and then there's the appetizer, and then there's the entree, and then there's the dessert. What does this add? It doesn't fucking matter, because The Dinner, the title that we're talking about, that's clearly supposed to be the main focus here, I don't know, 10 minutes of a 2-hour movie? You tell me. Anybody. So, I just don't... Maybe there's something here I don't get. Maybe because it's 4:18 in the morning, and I saw this movie about 5 days ago, and I hated every moment of watching it, and I was trying to block it out until I remembered, oh yeah, I gotta do this video. I'm just kicking the tripod now as well. So, I don't know what to do with this, but it is... Yeah, it's just fucking terrible. It is a garbage piece of shit movie, and that's it. Easily one of the worst of the year, I assume. We'll see what happens in the next 4 months. So we'll see. We've got a long road ahead still. So next week is going to be really big. Not only am I going to do that Western Versus, but I believe there's going to be 7 movies on the review video. I believe there are 4 coming out on DVD, and then I'll be seeing Logan Lucky, I'll be seeing Annabelle, and I'll be seeing Girls Trip, because that's just how it worked out. And yes, and of course the anniversary screening of Bonnie and Clyde, which I will certainly review down the road. I know what movie I want to do it with too, so whenever I can get that figured out, you'll be seeing that as well. So yes, I think it's time for me to get some sleep now. So until that very big week coming next week, that's